The Firm, India's only show on corporate law, tax and audit matters.
Hello and welcome to The Firm. On the show this week, TERI serves as a test case of how Indian organizations deal with sexual harassment allegations against the top boss. And meet Grex, an exchange-like platform for unlisted companies. It's a grim story of alleged sexual harassment by R K Pachauri, the chief of one of India's most respected research institutions. But what's worse is the way the complaint has been handled. Whether Mr. Pachauri is guilty or not is one issue, but the other equally important question to answer is, did TERI and its management, specifically its governing council, follow due process in investigating the harassment claim? Did they do their best in protecting the victim? Aayush Ailawadi finds out.
On the 18th of February 2015, a 29-year-old researcher accused R K Pachauri, then Director General of the Energy Research Institute, or TERI, of sexually harassing her since 2013. The 75-year-old Pachauri denied the charge but stepped down as Director General and went on leave. An internal complaints committee at TERI investigated the matter and filed a report. Mr. Pachauri secured anticipatory bail and also appealed to an industrial tribunal in Delhi to stay the ICC report. The tribunal granted a stay on the grounds that the principles of natural justice were not followed. Meanwhile, the police investigation continued. In November 2015, the complainant resigned from TERI citing mistreatment. This month, Dr. Pachauri was promoted to Executive Vice Chairman, a post specifically created for him by TERI's governing council. Soon after, another complainant, a former TERI employee, also accused Mr. Pachauri of sexual harassment. The report filed by TERI's Internal Complaints Committee is a confidential document as required by the law, so its findings are not public. Did it find R K Pachauri guilty? If not, why did he ask the Industrial Tribunal to stay its recommendations? And if it did find him guilty, then why has TERI's governing council not taken any action against Pachauri? That's the question leading lawyer Indira Jaisingh has asked in her writ petition. Indira Jaisingh was the first woman to be appointed Additional Solicitor General of India. She's a reputed Supreme Court lawyer, and on behalf of the complainant, she has filed a writ petition at the Delhi High Court. In the petition, she accuses TERI of brazenly supporting Pachauri and believes that the provisions of the sexual harassment law have been violated in this case.
When it comes to TERI, it's no different from any other organization like a public limited company or a private limited company or an NGO or a society or a trust. They're all governed by the Protection of Women from Sexual Harassment Act. NGOs are governed as well, societies are governed as well. So first and foremost, you have to understand the Act applies to them. Secondly, you must understand it applies to everybody right from the managing director down to the most junior-most employee in the chain of command, whether it's a peon or a typist or a whoever. It applies to everyone equally. Now, when I say there was a fundamental breach, it is the Supreme Court which has said, and this is captured in the Act as well, that sexual harassment must be made an act of misconduct in all these organizations. So the first fundamental breach I see with TERI is it has not been made an act of misconduct under any rules or regulations framed by TERI, nor would you find it in the contract of employment, say with Dr. Pachauri.
The complainant's lawyer, Prashant Mendiratha, details instances of how TERI has allegedly blocked the investigation.
There has been breach of the provision of the Sexual Harassment Act. The Vishakha guidelines have not been followed, which were there before the Act. And of course, the criminal case. What has happened here is that TERI has refused access to the Delhi police, to its internal server. Now, the case of our complainant is that she was sexually harassed, physically by words, by action, then through SMSs as well as emails. Some of those emails could have been on the internal server. The internal server, the internal email ID reads teri.res.in. So now the Delhi police wanted access to the internal server. It made an application to the TERI that allow us to have access to the internal server. And the best part is the TERI refused that particular part, which is extremely sad.
Both lawyers representing the complainants say that they've been unable to obtain a copy of TERI's service rules. The law requires every organization to have service rules, including rules on how sexual harassment cases should be dealt with.
Could we please be informed by the Governing Council whether they have service rules in place dealing with sexual harassment or making it an act of misconduct? I have not seen any. I've looked all over. I've not been able to find any of these rules.
I think today it would be very rare to find an organization not also mentioning about sexual harassment and so on, because the Act requires it. It requires people to be made aware and all of it. So it would be there in some form or the other in code of conduct or service rules and so on. It would be there. I mean, it's I would think today under the Act, if you say I don't have this, I've not made people aware, then that would be a violation of the Act, isn't it?
The complainants' lawyers accuse TERI and its governing council of not taking sexual harassment allegations seriously. That puts the spotlight on the governing council and its many illustrious members, such as Deepak Parekh, Hemendra Kothari, Naina Lal Kidwai, and also a former government secretary. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw stepped down only recently. The bigger question this story raises is how an organization deals with sexual harassment accusations when they are against the top boss. TERI, or the Energy and Resources Institute, is a registered society established in 1974. It receives substantial funding from the Government of India and has also advised the government on key policy issues relating to climate change. Lawyers say that it's TERI's management structure that seems to be at the root of the problem.
If you see the deed of trust, you're of course aware that initially this was a trust which was founded by the Tatas. And very eminent people were trustees, including Mr. Tata himself and Mr. Nani Palkiwala. Now, it is this trust which then comes to be taken over by another group of trustees, in which Dr. Pachauri himself is a trustee, and many others. I think Ajay Mathur was also one of the trustees. So when I say there's a problem with the structure of the trust deed, what I mean is that suddenly people like Dr. Pachauri and Mr. Ajay Mathur come to occupy a duality of positions. Okay, they are trustees, they are on the governing board, and they are also performing services for the organizations. Now, in a situation like this, it generates lack of accountability, because who are you accountable to?
The Sexual Harassment Act of 2013 has that covered as well. Under Section 6, if the complaint is against the boss himself, then the complainant can approach the district's local complaints committee instead. This committee has to be set up by the district officer. But in this case, the victim didn't have such an option since the government hasn't set one up yet. So the complainant turned to TERI's Internal Complaints Committee instead. The ICC is empowered by law to grant certain reliefs to a complainant during the pendency of an inquiry. But again, the lawyers in this case say that the complainant was denied adequate interim relief.
While the complaint was pending with the ICC, while it was being investigated for those 90 days, we did seek certain interim reliefs. The first one was that allow me to work from home. That was for the first 3 months that I was allowed to be at home. I was in fact sent on leave. For the next 2 months, I kept asking, allow me to work from home. They did not allow me that. They did not pay any salary to me after my 5th month. So I was without salary for the rest of the months till the time I was compelled to resign. Because, you know, when you stop the bread and butter, that's where you hit the person most.
So as soon as the complaint is filed, the Internal Complaints Committee has the authority to pass certain orders, you know, in order to ensure that the complainant is protected, you know, that she feels safe. Because the entire purpose of the Act is to ensure a safe working place for women. So therefore, if she files a complaint, especially in a case like this against your top boss, it's not easy at all. I mean, expecting her to come back to the same place to work, or him working in the same place, is not what the Act envisages.
While the complainant felt isolated, R K Pachauri travelled the world in his capacity as TERI's boss. Recently, he was promoted to Executive Vice Chairman, a post the Governing Council created especially for him. When she heard of the promotion, the complainant said in an open letter, "The news of promotion of a man who stands booked on charges of sexual harassment at a workplace, stalking and criminal intimidation by the country's who's who makes my flesh crawl."
Our complainant not only feels let down by TERI, but definitely by the Governing Council of TERI. So these are individuals who've reached the pinnacles of success in their field. And these persons did not even bother to issue a statement to our client saying that they are absolutely with her and that she should not fear. Here was a girl who lodged a complaint against the person who was holding the highest post in the organization. She went on leave for those 3 months as provided under the Sexual Harassment Act. For another 2 months, they allowed her to continue to be on leave because they did not allow her to come back to the head office where the sexual harassment had taken place. All of a sudden, they started telling her to go and please join another office. And for all of a sudden now, after 2 years or 2.5 years of she having worked with TERI, they realized that other office was near her house. So unfortunately, Governing Council should have come up and said something, should have given her some sort of confidence, should have given the other women in the organization some confidence.
It's rather unfortunate. I mean, you know, we see in a lot of companies, if there are certain complaints filed by employees of the lower rung, you know, where there are small, where the allegations may not be as grave, you'll immediately see employers saying that we have zero tolerance to sexual harassment at workplace. We will terminate the guy. There is no need even for an inquiry. And we have to say, no, you have to follow due process of law. And that the punishment has to be proportionate to the allegations. But I think all that kind of falters and dissolves and dilutes when the allegations are made against the top management or the top bosses. And that is where the true test of the law actually comes in. And yes, the Governing Council ought to maybe have been a little more vocal and fair.
I don't think we should have considered him being in any position actually in the company after something like this has happened, and it has been through a prolonged period, because I think the whole institution has also been put through, has really gone into disrepute for just the actions of one individual.
Recently, another former TERI employee has also accused Pachauri of sexual harassment. Media reports suggest that a male researcher quit TERI because he was pressured to convince his colleague to settle the matter. Despite all this, TERI's Governing Council has maintained silence. Absolute silence for 1 whole year. In Mumbai, Aayush Ailawadi.
Well, the Governing Council's silence is disturbing, to say the least. Let's take a quick break on that note. Let's come back with Meet Grex, an exchange-like platform for unlisted companies.